Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Today is April 20th, 2023. We have Leigh Rauk with us today. She's going to be our co-host, our guest host, and she's going to be discussing imposter syndrome. I wrote to a bunch of people that to advertise the session that I feel like an imposter on a regular basis, thinking about what I'm doing. And I've been around for a while, and I think that a lot of us feel this way. So I think this is a very relevant topic, and I'm glad that you're here listening to us. So, Leigh, take it away.
Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. I'm really excited to be leading this session, despite feeling like I'm definitely not the expert in how to address imposter syndrome, although I feel it on a regular basis. So that will have to do for guiding us through the conversation today. Just a quick introduction to who I am. I know a lot of you, but my name is Dr. Leigh Rauk. I am an independent evaluation consultant, and I work closely and collaboratively with my team of other independent evaluation consultants at Collaborators Consulting Group. And I do a lot of community-based research and evaluation, particularly around community development and well-being and positive youth development. So today I really just want this to be very discussion based. I want everybody to kind of join in. Feel free to drop things in the chat that are resonating with you, that's coming up for you. I'm going to give just a really brief presentation just to kind of lay the groundwork for the conversation, just to give some introductory information. I'm sure all of this will make sense for a lot of folks because I'm assuming that everybody is here because you feel imposter syndrome at least at some point in your life, or maybe on a daily basis like I do. So we'll go ahead and get started, and then we'll open it up for a larger group discussion at the end. So I wanted to start by grounding the conversation in this quote by Maya Angelou, who at one point said, "I've written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find out. They're going to find out now. I've run a game on everybody, and they're going to find me out." And I really wanted to start with this because I think it really just exemplifies what it feels like to be an imposter, or what imposter syndrome feels like. And I also think it's relevant that this comes from somebody who I think a lot of us would agree is very highly regarded, very successful, and even she still feels like an imposter. So I think it's important to know that everybody feels imposter syndrome at some point in their life, regardless of their career stage, regardless of how far they are along in life, regardless of their experience level. I think it's a pretty universal experience. So I probably don't have to explain what imposter syndrome feels like, but if there's any of you out there who haven't felt this before, one, consider yourself very lucky. But two, I just wanted to kind of just lay the groundwork of what imposter syndrome really is, because it's more than just a feeling of anxiety or uncertainty, but it's really that nagging feeling that you're a fraud or that you don't belong. And some descriptions of imposter syndrome that really resonated with me and how I feel is that it's a belief that you don't deserve to be in the position that you're in, or an inability to objectively assess your level of competence, abilities, and skills, crediting your success to external factors like you just got lucky or it just happened to work out, or a fear that you won't and can't live up to the expectations placed on you either by yourself or by other people. So I would love if folks, who feel comfortable could kind of drop in the chat what imposter syndrome feels like for you. How does it show up for you? Does this description kind of resonate with what you feel? Feel free to just drop some notes in the chat as we kind of go through this. So there is apparently 5 different types of imposter syndrome. I didn't know this until I started preparing for the conversation, but I thought that this was really interesting to kind of categorize the different types. And I'm curious which types you feel like resonate most with you. But you have the superhero who overworks to make up for how inadequate they feel. You've got the natural genius who sets exceedingly high goals and then feels really crushed or disappointed when they don't meet them. You've got the expert who's never satisfied with their level of understanding and is always wanting to learn more. You've got the perfectionist, who's probably me, who's never completely happy with their work and is always fixated on their flaws rather than their strengths or what went well. And then you've got the soloist, who would just rather work alone, because if they ask for help, it's going to be a sign of weakness or a sign of failure. So maybe just drop in the chat too, which one feels the most like you. I would say I'm a combination of a perfectionist and a natural genius, but there's probably little bits and pieces of this that come up at different times, depending on what the experience is that's causing me to kind of feel that imposter syndrome. So this is horrible. Nobody likes to feel this way. It's not a fun feeling, but we're definitely not alone. So I wanted to highlight that 84% of entrepreneurs and small business owners report experiencing imposter syndrome, which is really, really high percentage. As well as 70% of successful people reported experiencing imposter feelings at some point in their life. And 75% of executive level women have experienced imposter syndrome. There's definitely some research to suggest that women feel imposter syndrome more than men, but there was kind of conflicting research around that. So I think it is a pretty universal experience, but it may be focused on for women a little bit more. I also just wanted to really kind of bring up the kind of problematizing of imposter syndrome that has happened. So the imposter syndrome phenomenon was originally coined in 1978 by two female psychologists. But there's been some kind of critiques of this framework or this model or this terminology that the impact of systemic racism, classism, xenophobia, and other biases are were entirely absent when the concept was actually developed. And, women, and particularly women of color and people of other various backgrounds, were actually not included in the original study. So the basis for this terminology is really sort of limiting. It doesn't really take into account the systemic factors that might actually cause somebody to feel imposter syndrome. And I just wanted to highlight this quote from a really wonderful article called Stop Telling Women That They Have Imposter Syndrome in the Harvard Business Review. That basically just recognizes that imposter syndrome as we know it today really puts the blame on individuals and doesn't really account for historical and cultural contexts that are foundational for how it manifests. They speak specifically about women and women of color and how imposter syndrome is specifically focused on fixing the individual rather than fixing the places where we work or the context in which we live and work that actually result in us feeling these imposter syndromes. So I don't go into this too much, but I wanted to lay this foundation and kind of just bring up this critique because I think it is really interesting and it's really important. And I think it can be a useful piece of the conversation that we're going to have today. So with that being said, when you look up how to address imposter syndrome out there online in the research, everything really is focused on individuals, what individuals can do to crush imposter syndrome, to overcome imposter syndrome. How can you as an individual address it? So I think it would be really cool in our conversation today if we could actually talk about some of the maybe systemic or cultural shifts that need to happen to prevent imposter syndrome from happening in the first place. But I know that this conversation and this topic overall is really about how do we as, people address imposter syndrome in our own life. So I have 5 tips that I pulled that I thought were really useful. I can't necessarily validate how well these tips work because to be honest, I haven't used a lot of these, but I thought that they were really useful and things that I probably will try to implement moving forward to help kind of combat those internal feelings of imposter syndrome. So the first is just focusing on the facts, separating your feelings from what actually happened, really reminding yourself, when you feel like, oh, that didn't go well, I didn't do my best, reminding yourself, well, what were people's reactions in the room? What did people tell you after that presentation or that training that you gave? Did people come up and praise you and tell you how useful it was? Then that's a fact that you can kind of hold on to kind of combat those feelings of maybe inadequacy or concern that you didn't do your best. It's also really helpful to talk to a colleague, a friend, or a mentor and share how you're feeling. I think acknowledging how we're feeling is really useful. And oftentimes when I share this with friends, they validate that they also feel the same way. And it's nice to know that you're not alone in that feeling. Another tip is to acknowledge the feeling, validate that it's there, and then, release it. So acknowledge that you're feeling poorly, validate that it's okay to feel that way. It's normal. Other people feel this way too. And then, let those feelings go if they aren't really based in reality and kind of try to move on as best you can so that you can keep moving forward and not get stuck. Another useful tip is to remind yourself you are good at what you do. So oftentimes what I do is I remind myself that I do have specific training, I do have experience, and that has prepared me to be good at what I do, as well as also reminding myself that I'm still learning and then that's okay. And I have the tools that I need to be able to learn what I need to do. I'm an expert at learning. I have been in school for X number of years. I've learned how to learn what I need to do to be able to work effectively. I also really liked this idea of creating a praise folder. So keeping track of all of the feedback and positive things that people have said to you or about you over the years so that you can go back and reread those when you're feeling particularly like an imposter or when you're struggling with kind of that feeling of confidence. Being able to have those concrete examples of positive things that people have told you about who you are, the work that you do, can just be that really concrete reminder rather than trying to convince yourself internally that you are good at what you do, that you know what you're doing. And then just the last tip is to make a list of 10 things that show that you're qualified, really concrete things that demonstrate that you are qualified, that you know how to do what you do. And having that list kind of handy to refer back to might also be useful. So that's really my presentation. I want to use the rest of the time just to hear what's resonating with folks, what's coming up for you. I'd love for people to share how they combat feelings of imposter syndrome when it arises, what's worked for you, what hasn't worked for you, what are you maybe still trying out as a way to overcome those feelings. I'm also curious to know what triggers imposter syndrome for people. When do you feel it the most? For me, it's when I have to give a presentation or do something new that I've never done before. That really brings up the imposter syndrome for me is when I feel like I have to do something new and people are going to, be critiquing it or reviewing it and I might fail. And then the last one is just for those of you who have been consultants for a lot longer than I certainly have, what advice would you give to new consultants who are just starting out, who may be experiencing imposter syndrome maybe more frequently because this is such a new experience. We're still building our businesses. We're still getting our feet on the ground. And so how have you been able to kind of overcome that and move forward and build a successful business? So I'll drop the discussion questions in the chat. But really would just love to hear from folks and just open it up for a larger discussion.
So before we stop the video, maybe I could ask a couple questions just to engage you in some conversation around this, Leigh.
Sure.
And then I'll stop the recording so that people can feel free to come on and not worry about saying something stupid. They can leave it to me to say something stupid that'll be recorded forever on YouTube. So my reflection was there's a lot of relationship between imposter syndrome and like ego, and perhaps even like a healthy ego in some ways is one where we believe we can do things. Perhaps they're not accurate. Where a healthy ego is one where we push ourselves to do something that maybe we're not prepared to do, but we succeed in it just through this kind of belief that we can figure things out along the way, and that becomes kind of a correlation with this imposter syndrome. And I'm not sure if you've thought about it that way, and whether that's you think there's a relationship between an ego and I imagine a healthy like positive attitude takes you a long way, even if you feel like on the inside you're a faker or you're an imposter. But if you believe that you can figure out along the way, you have that healthy ego. In many ways, it's just like you're going to figure it out and it'll be okay. But if you have a very pessimistic outlook, then in many ways, this is the one thing I always tell people: if you're a pessimist, this independent consulting is probably not the right place for you, because you've got to believe you're going to figure it out somehow, and you have no idea how it's going to work out. I don't know. What are your reflections on that?
Yeah, I think that has been my biggest way of trying to combat the feelings. And I can't say that it's always successful because I think sometimes if you don't truly believe what you're telling yourself, it can be difficult. But that is kind of what, when I'm feeling like I don't know what to do or I feel like I'm an imposter, I consistently remind myself that I have the tools and the knowledge to be able to learn. I know where to go find the information. I know that I have resources that I can draw on, and I know that I am capable of figuring it out. And I do feel like that helps, being able to just remind myself that even if I don't know something right now, or I feel like I'm not prepared to, do whatever the task is at hand yet, just reminding myself that I have the ability to learn, and I have countless years of examples where I have been able to learn and grow and take on new opportunities and challenges and have been able to successfully, accomplish those things. So I think that tip where focusing on the facts can be really helpful is, reminding yourself of all of the times before when you felt like you were an imposter or you weren't capable of something, and where you actually overcame that and you were able to do it because you did the research, you talked to colleagues, you knew where to find the sources of information that you needed. So reminding yourself that you've had experience in the past of figuring it out and learning something new, and this new experience or opportunity is no different from those previous ones. So yeah, I think that that's like a really helpful way to try to combat those feelings.
And just a couple more thoughts before I stop the recording. Um, but one thing I've learned over time is we're constantly facing new challenges, or as Brene Brown puts it, FFTs. The first F is an expletive. You can imagine what the F word is, but that word, first time, and we're constantly dealing with these first times, and it never goes away. And that's the thing that I think it took me a while to grow kind of a thick skin around, because no matter what you do, how far you get, there's always going to be a new first time, and
Right.
you're always tackling that next thing.
Yeah.
For me, it was hiring my first employee. Oh my God, that was like mind blowing. And
Yeah.
then having to hire more, and then more projects came on, and everything just kept getting more intense. And I
Yeah.
kept going, who am I to do all this work? But
Yeah.
then you just have to just trust the process and know that you're not the first person to do this before, and other people have done it well, and
Yeah.
success follows. All right.
Definitely.
Any last thoughts before I stop the recording? Otherwise, I can do it. We can just open it up for conversation. All right, everybody out in YouTube land, nice seeing you. Try and make it live, and you can engage in more of the conversation.